All right, let's talk about sin. This is a topic I've avoided, but I think it's important for us to discuss. I don't know how you've heard the word sin defined. Oftentimes I've heard it defined as missing the mark, which is true. The Greek word for sin, it's an archery term, that's what it means. But I find that interesting. I think that we kind of have to let the Bible define it, because yes, it is a Greek word that is related to archery and it means missing the mark. But when it's first used in scripture, it's used in Genesis chapter 4. This is when Cain, he hasn't quite killed his brother yet, but he's thinking about it. And God refers to, if you don't, basically God is saying, if you don't deal with the feelings that you're having right now, sin is lurking at the door, meaning sin can overtake you. That's the first time we see this word used. And at that point, the Bible was not being written in Greek. That's in Hebrew. So I find it interesting that oftentimes we use a Greek word to define a word that first occurred in the Hebrew. But anyway, let's fast forward to the New Testament and let John define it. And he calls sin lawlessness. Those who practice sin practice lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. So that's our definition. But then we also see this thing called iniquity in Scripture. We see sin and iniquity often associated with one another. So are they the same thing? Not entirely. Sin is what happens outside of your body. It is what happens in action. But iniquity is what is inside of you that then drives you to commit those actions. So the iniquity of my sin is a passage used in the Psalms that talks about iniquity is a descriptor. It's that thing inside of you that then infects everything that we do. So it's more of a character descriptor. But anyway, now that we kind of move through the definitions of what these words mean, one of the things that I will hear Christians say a lot of times, especially in regards to relationships or money or kind of those core things that we really don't like to make Jesus the Lord of all the time, anything that really tempts our flesh in a significant way. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, is it a sin though, if I do this? Like, what they're getting at is, how far can I go? Where's the line where it becomes sin? And how far can I go? How close can I get to that line without actually committing the action? Basically, how much of my flesh can I gratify before I get in trouble with it? That's what we're asking. And I hear that, and I get it, because I've asked those questions myself, but also I think they're the wrong questions. Because when we really think about it, if we have the opportunity to be close to God, to be this privilege of knowing Him and to be in pursuit of Him, then we should really be asking, what can I do to please Him? Not how much of my flesh can I gratify and get away with it, right? And so I think that when we find ourselves asking those kinds of questions in regards to sin, we're really indicating that we haven't come into a full understanding of who Jesus is, of what He went through for us, and how much He loves us. We haven't gotten to the place where our desire to please Him overtakes our desire to please ourselves. And that is the thing that we ought to be pursuing, not how much of me can I satisfy before making God mad, right? Because then you get to Psalm 19 that talks about, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord. And when David writes this, he's talking about his thoughts, right? And he starts a couple verses prior to that, and he says, like, how can I keep myself pure? How can I keep how can I keep sin away from me? And he gets to this point where we see him wrestling with his thought life. So then we have the questions, okay, so if we think about it, are our thoughts a sin? Is that a sin? Not technically, but aren't those more indicative of the iniquity that lives in us, that sort of taints everything that we do? So if we keep our thought life pure, may the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, then we have a greater likelihood of avoiding sin. Because if our thoughts are fixated on pleasing the Lord, the way that David wrote in that psalm, then our actions will follow what our thoughts are focused on. So it's not about how far can I get, how close can I get to that sin line before God gets mad at me. It's about, how can I please you in everything that I do, in everything that I think, in all that I am. And the only way that we get to that being our motivator is understanding who the Lord is, what he has done for you, and who you are created to be in him. And when you know those things, then the joy of being in relationship with him, the joy of pleasing the Lord, far outweighs the temporary joy that we may feel in gratifying our flesh in committing any kind of sin. So is it a sin? Is that the right question? I don't think so.